Today, we're digging into a document that some analysts say could trigger the biggest shift in American foreign policy in almost 100 years. We're not just talking about a minor policy tweak here. People are calling this the potential end of the world order as we've known it since the end of World War II. So yeah, let's get right into it.
Okay, so picture this. The date is Friday, December 5th, 2025. Late the night before, the Trump administration releases its new national security strategy. But here's the thing, they do it quietly, super quietly. And that quietness, that's our first clue that something is very, very different this time around.
And you know, that quiet release really is key. As Nahal Tusi from Politico points out, these strategy documents are normally a huge deal. They come with press conferences, big speeches, a lot of fanfare. It's a public declaration of America's vision for the world. So when you release one like this in the dead of night, it kind of suggests you know its contents are, well, to put it mildly, explosive.
So here's the game plan for today. We'll start with what's in this new strategy and why it's rejecting the post-war order. Then we'll look at the big pivot away from Europe, and we'll unpack the history of something called the Trump Corollary. From there, we'll see the plan for a new sphere of influence, and finally, we have to ask the big question. Is this the end of an era?
All right, first up, the new national strategy itself. And let's be really clear about something. This document isn't just a simple adjustment. It's being described as a total, top-to-bottom reimagining of America's role in the world. We're talking about undoing the entire foreign policy approach that's been in place since 1945.
So what exactly is this strategy rejecting? Well, at its very core, it's a complete dismissal of the global system that the Allies built after World War II. The document says, in no uncertain terms, that the U.S. is going to back away from the international commitments that have defined the last 80 years. So let's define what that system actually is.
And this, right here, is what's on the chopping block, the rules-based international order. This whole network of alliances like NATO, institutions like the UN, and free trade agreements. It was all designed for one big reason, to prevent another world war. But the authors of this new strategy, they claim this exact system has been bad for America, that it has, and I quote, undermined the character of our nation.
Okay, now this is where things get even more charged. The document itself didn't have a flashy public name, but observers, like the historian Cox Richardson, noted that supporters were calling it NSC 88. And that wasn't an accident. It was a label that carried a very heavy, and to many, a very disturbing meaning.
So why is that name so significant? Well, in white supremacist circles, the number 88 is code for Heil Hitler. Observers also pointed out that the document's core message could be summed up in 14 words, another direct reference to a well-known white supremacist slogan. The fact that this kind of coded language was being used to describe the strategy was, for many analysts, a huge red flag.
Now for the first major strategic shift this document lays out, pivoting away from Europe. For 80 years, the alliance with Europe has been the absolute bedrock of U.S. foreign policy. This document proposes a reorientation that is frankly one of the most radical things in the entire strategy.
And you can really see the change when you put them side by side. The document describes Europe as being at risk of civilizational erasure because of migration and says the U.S. needs to help it correct its current trajectory. It even hints that multicultural European societies might not belong in NATO anymore. And Russia? No longer listed as a country of concern. Instead, the document basically bows to Russian demands to stop any future expansion of NATO. It's a stunning reversal.
The strategy tries to justify its new vision for the Western Hemisphere by calling it a Trump Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Now, to really get how radical this is, we've got to take a quick trip back in time.
So this story really unfolds over 2 centuries, with 3 key dates. It all starts back in 1823 with President James Monroe. Then it gets a major update in 1904 from Teddy Roosevelt. And now, in this 2025 document, we're seeing its most dramatic reimagining yet.
Believe it or not, the original Monroe Doctrine from 1823 was actually anti-colonial. Spain's empire was falling apart, and the U.S. wanted to trade with all these newly independent nations in Latin America. So the doctrine was basically a big keep-out sign to Europe. It said the U.S. would leave these new republics alone, and it expected everyone else to do the same.
Okay, fast forward to 1904. Teddy Roosevelt adds his famous corollary, and this was a massive shift. Roosevelt was worried European powers would intervene in Latin America to collect on debts, so he declared the U.S. would act as an international police power. The message went from stay out to we will step in, and it was used to justify U.S. military intervention all over the region. So just look at this evolution. Monroe says, Europe, stay out. Roosevelt says, actually, the U.S. will intervene. And the Trump Corollary? It takes it a giant leap further. It declares the U.S. will dominate the Americas. We're moving way beyond policing to a system of actively rewarding governments that fall in line with U.S. principles and punishing those who don't.
So what does this new plan for dominance actually look like in practice? The strategy has a nice name for it: commercial diplomacy. But when you dig into the details, you see a much clearer picture of what it means.
And the document leaves absolutely no room for doubt about the end goal. It states it plainly. U.S. preeminence, and that means total dominance, in the Western Hemisphere is a non-negotiable condition for America's own security and prosperity.
And here's the playbook. Step 1. U.S. embassies are basically turned into scouts, finding business opportunities for American companies. Step 2. The entire financial might of the U.S. government gets behind these ventures. And step 3. If any of those countries tries to, regulate or tax these businesses, the U.S. will actively resist and reverse those rules.
When you put it all together, what you have is a strategy that throws out the whole idea of national self-determination. Instead, it fully embraces a much older concept: spheres of influence. This is a throwback to a pre-World War II world, where big, powerful countries just control the weaker ones around them, a system that leaders like Russia's Vladimir Putin are very fond of today.
So let's talk about the fallout. After this document dropped, how did the rest of the world react? Well, the response from foreign policy experts was immediate, and boy was it stark.
National security specialist Anne Applebaum called it a performative suicide. I mean, just think about that phrase. A public abdication of American influence on the world stage. It's a pretty damning assessment of the self-inflicted damage this new strategy could cause.
And from a European perspective, the conclusion was even more blunt. Ulrike Franke of the European Council on Foreign Relations just stated it flatly: the transatlantic relationship is over. This wasn't just a political disagreement anymore. It was now official U.S. policy. The West, she said, as it used to be, no longer exists. And listen, this isn't just rhetoric. According to reports from Reuters, Pentagon officials have already put a deadline on this thing. They've reportedly told European diplomats that by 2027, the U.S. expects Europe to be handling most of its own defense. So the withdrawal, it's already in motion.
Which leaves all of us with this final, really unsettling question. For 80 years, the entire world has operated under one basic set of rules and assumptions. This one document tears up that rulebook. We've just walked through what's inside it, but the bigger question, what happens next, is something the entire world is now going to have to answer.